All right, now drawing the feet and the toes in their entirety and looking at now anatomy as we do it. So these video lessons, I'm going to use actually wonderful art historical references of sculptures of feet. I think they're wonderful to use. It's kind of one last step removed from the true anatomy of the foot, which gives you a little bit more areas to get confused by detail. So we're going to use, in this case, Michelangelo's David, the left foot. So we'll get started here. So now I'm going to take you through the drawing. We're going to now block in, lay in the lower leg coming down to the malleoli, the medial and lateral ankle, and then we're going to start blocking in the meat of that wedge. Now I'm not going to go through a full wedge, but I'm thinking wedge as I'm drawing that triangular wedge. So working with the top of that foot, you see the muscles now of the extensor digitorum brevis muscles on top, and then we'll get down to the phalanges and metatarsals now of those toes. So I'm drawing very broadly. Most of this is now with a Conte stick in my hand, and then I'll use a pastel or Conte pencil when I need tighter passages with the line work. So now working with the back of the calcaneal area and the fat pad. So we're drawing everything together. You know, we're taking that final step, and it's really my opinion. I'm going to do quite a bit. I'm going to do 2 different videos. My opinion is you just can't draw enough feet and hands. I think that they're problematic areas, and they're difficult. They're even tedious for me and challenging. But you know, we want to take this simple and add layers of complexity as certainly as we go along. So now I've got a pretty good positioning now of the gestural forms of the foot. Now I'm going in with the tighter pencil and going to define out the medial condyle now of the tibia down below, or the medial malleolus, and we know that that's higher, so we've got that placed a little higher than the lateral, even when the foot is slightly on a tilt. So you notice this angle where the foot comes down, it's really balancing off of the foot pad or the ball of the foot onto the digit of that wonderful big toe tendon that comes up to that big toe condyle. So now feeling now through here, you can see that little area I'm drawing here separates the tibialis anterior for the extensor digitorum longus, that long muscle that allows those tendons to come down. Now sheathed, that's underneath everything. Now as we get to that big meaty area that I'll get to in a moment, that'll be the brevis, and of course the extensor hallucis brevis too as well, which comes down to the big toe. You can see the tendon coming out. So I've got a little separation between those muscle forms. Now feeling the lateral malleoli or malleolus coming in. So we're high on the inside, we're lower now coming down. That just starts to bulge out. We're feeling that slight turn in, head of that, as it starts its journey downward, and we'll end lower with a tilt foot there. And so now I'm feeling this meaty ball of the foot. This is the bone of the cuneiform bones, right, before we get to the metatarsals. And then, of course, the extensor digitorum brevis on top, which is more on the lateral side and moves slightly diagonal to the medial side. And then, of course, we have the extensor hallucis brevis too as well, which comes down to the toe. Now getting back here to the Achilles heel region and into the fat pad, the calcaneus bone, and then the fat pads all together over that. And you see that wonderful view you get. And what you want to know is it's downward trending, it's at an angle, and notice how the front of the foot, where that gradual turning in of the cuneiform bones and the metatarsal will overlap. So that goes underneath, and now we come on top, you see, with the cuneiform bones through this area, the navicular bone, and then the lateral cuneiform. And then I'm getting just the feel of all this turning. See how that turns, and then we see how that falls down. It still falls down even when the muscles are onto the model. We still get that triangular wedging that's at an angle. It's not flat across. So that whole area can be thought of that way, and it can also be thought of when I draw. I think of it as a big egg form. So it has kind of an egg, like a chicken egg, goose egg kind of feeling to it when we're drawing. So there are many different conceptual ways that you can visualize drawing a foot, and I think the best way to start out with is as a wedge when you are conceiving the first part, and then this part is so much obviously an egg kind of form. Now you can see where the egg ends right in through here, and it flattens out, but it's still in a downward trend to the end of the metatarsals into the phalanges. So it doesn't end abruptly. That's why there's a kind of a stair step to that wedging. And I'll throw a little tone back here to kind of put that in shadow a little bit. I've just got that big block here, Conte stick, to draw with. When I draw bigger, these are decently big size. They're not smaller. They're about, I've got a big sheet of paper out, so it's nice to use that big stick to draw, especially when you have to draw something as intricate as the phalanges of the toes, the proximal, medial, and the distal. Now, getting to that arch, the longitudinal medial arch coming over. See how it overlaps the heel? Then I'm feeling out the metatarsal of the big toe where it ends, that big, what I call the knuckle. Remember how large it is. It connects those big great bones, the metatarsal and the first proximal phalange of that. And of course it's wrapped in ligament. And then a tendon comes over the top and two of them, and then over the bottom. So there's quite a bit of the material that we see. Then you can see that tendon coming on down, the Hallucis brevis, coming on in and over, and then it's going to end. Michelangelo ends it at that knuckle top and through there, all that wonderful bone and through there. So there's a simplification he's gone through already with this beautiful, graceful foot that we can learn from and use in our drawings. So it's a good way to learn working with feet before drawing, or in addition to, if you will, drawing just normal, natural feet. And I thought instead of using close-ups or having to take photos of pretty gross feet, maybe have to find some pretty feet. But feet are feet. They are what they are, whether they're gross or clean or whatnot. They're very expressive. So, but I thought this would be a good way to introduce more study thoroughly, because you get hair on the top of the toes, you get other wrinkles and skin, and it's just, I think it's a little bit one reduction of easy to sell. So you can see how that falling and gradual turning is now from the egg form of the top of the foot there with the brevis muscles and the hallucis muscle and the tendon coming through, and now we're kind of getting underneath that knuckle of the toe, of the great toe, coming downward, the metatarsal. So it overlaps now through here, and you can see as it ends, comes on through now, and then we're kind of thinking this line I'm making here is all about that crease where the digits end of the proximal phalanges, and they come back into the metatarsal. That curved line needs to be curved, and it's flatter there as it comes on down, and that's where we find the creasing of our foot. And we'll find it in a shoe crease. If you wear out your shoe or a boot, it will bend. It needs to bend there. If it doesn't, it's probably going to be a very uncomfortable type of shoe. Tendon, just feeling the tendon gradually, keeping everything very gradual and soft, and feeling out the head of the tendon onto the condyle, the two condyles together, the end of the metatarsal to the proximal phalange. It's a very, very pronounced area, and he gives it like a little pad up on top of there, a little meat of the bone. He shows us a little bone, a little tendon on top and through there, so we can get that around and through. So you can see the lines I've made for the toes, the flow of the toes, the gesture of the toes. That's important to get in a drawing and get into your drawings before you get deep into the toe drawing as well, to get proportion as well. I see a lot of students just start to speed it up, and the toes become weird little sausage, not even sausages, just rectangular blocks. So curving over the great toe connection between the fat pad that gives it beef and meat to it, and also the phalangeal metatarsal joint. Say that 5 times fast at a party. Phalangeal metatarsal joint. That sounds pretty weird, but cool at the same time. move this paper around a little bit to get it better position, I think, here. So this is an overdub. I think it's easier just for me to just relax and draw, and I can go through these faster. And then overdub and really kind of transcribe or translate or describe actually what I want to be doing here. So first, getting the first feel of the toe, coming over, falling over down in this digit joint through there, really gets hubbed on top, and then it starts to get a little longer and flatter as we come down. Very blocky at that tip, and we're always trying to keep in mind that the distal joint, the distal bone of the big toe is very much triangular. So it's wider at its medial and lateral head, and then as it moves to its front area, I guess the anterior, it gets a little bit angular more, and comes in like I think of it as a triangle too as well. Don't be afraid to draw the feet, the digits, or the bones, or the toes, however you want to call them, a little longer than what you think. I find that students generally tend to draw them a little shorter. I probably because I tended to when I was a student. And don't be afraid to lengthen them and keep them longer. And you notice the toe that Michelangelo has fashioned and sculpted out of marble here. The second toe, or that middle toe there, the one that everything leans back into, is longer than the big toe. That's not always the case. My toe is not that way. I have stockier kind of toes, and it's not the case with my big toe and second toe. The second toe is a little bit shorter than the big toe. I think aesthetically speaking, the tendency in art history has been to extend the long toe, the second toe, longer than the big toe. Finding that toe now, I'm just kind of feeling and showing you that the tendon comes all the way through there and it ends before the nail, I believe. I'm not really sure on that, and I don't really care. But that tendon will come all the way down pretty close. And we're going to get the feeling of the end of the toe, of the block, as if we kind of cut it off, if we sliced it, to get you to understand that is a blockier surface. And then we can kind of sculpt or draw the feeling of it now a little bit more conducively to its final shape. So we're visualizing a central, a major form, a volumetric form, and then we're adding on the more specific detail of that and more traditional kind of draftsmanship. Then later on you can do expressive things but change that process, or could totally obliterate it, which is exciting. So I'll say this about myself, my professional work is far outside traditional, and it doesn't have to be, but it's a great place to train, to study, to keep yourself fresh, keep your drawing skills strong, even though you might not want to draw a traditional figurative model approach. Getting that toenail embedded, that collagen embedded into the toe, so the nail will arch and curve and take on the shape of the toe, so it's arched and curved. This nail gets a little flatter as it comes out to the tip of the toe, but see how arched it is right through there, and it embeds in, so the skin overlays, it kind of grabs over it and wraps around it, especially in this, I believe this is the cuticle area of the toe. I'm just feeling around the toe now. Feeling the roundness. And in the hub of the toe in there, pointing in the right direction. You always want to generally try to keep the direction or thrust of the toe going, the gesture as well as the curvature to make that, making that little connection. Turn around through here, getting the bottom of that, make sure that comes in. Then we'll just kind of smooth out this toe a little bit. Get that feeling underneath where it kind of touches the ground. Let's stress on that, for that area right where I'm drawing right in through there. I'll put a little pressure, a little dark charcoal on that. just to show that. So now going back to more blunt instrument to lay in the next set of toes, and just feeling the tendon coming off the brevis there, the brevis muscles, digitorum brevis. And don't forget the extensor digitorum longus tendons will come down too. So there's a double layer of tendons. All that's curving over. Demonstrating curving over, then this comes forward a little bit. You can see where that peaks out and over and gets underneath and comes forward, and that overlaps the back and through there. So it's important to see that. Then we get that big hub back there. That's roughly where that crease is about. If you kept on going and down and underneath, that's about where the tuberosity of the fifth metatarsal. So now I'm getting a decent feel for the shape of the bottom of the foot, which is one of the more challenging areas of the figure to draw. Probably the hands and the fingers and the feet, and then the facial features of a model are its most difficult parts. So I'm thinking about three things. I'm thinking about the bones. I'm thinking about the volumetric part of the flesh, the fat pads in the bones and the flesh, or what we call volumetric figure, volumetric of the figure of the toes, essentially. And then the last thing I'm thinking about is the detail of what is the true nature of what we're drawing, or what I'm drawing beyond the bones and the volumetric part of it. So I'm trying to put all that knowledge together to make a convincing looking foot. Because drawing is labor intensive. You have to draw every single square area of it. I guess except for the back if it's opaque. But it's very labor intensive. So now, top of the toe I'm thinking of the tendon coming down. Michelangelo doesn't express them, but I wanted to kind of indicate them just to show the flow of those tendons down through. And so now I'm thinking about that condyle area, its side of the toe coming through, and it's a classic box shape now, isn't it? With the shading on the left side of the box of that toe. Shading in through here. You can see that come downward. Pretty clear box, and then that just gets pushed back now and shaded to really show the intensity of that box-like form. And then this little area is where the metatarsal phalangeal joint comes together and it gets narrower. You get that flesh and muscle material on top, and then that joint turns up and over. There's a little bit of tweaking, and that's where the toes generally begin, and it also shows you that crease that we get. And then we're feeling this around the big toe, underneath the stress of those forms of the fat pads, giving you a little bit of that condyle dimple. And that's the condyle of the bone, and the fat pads are underneath it. And cleaning out that nail a little bit. Got a dirty nail. Now, just showing you the box of that box position. It's kind of, see how the toe, I don't know if I draw it well enough actually, but if you look at the edge of where the shadow is of the big toe, see how it curls up? It's the perfect pad expression for the distal bone in there. It's a decent job. I could have probably, and I don't know if I go back and change it, but angle that nail down a little bit downward trending and upward trending to show that, but it's decent position. So feeling that around and coming down to now the medial and distal part of the joints of the toe, and you can see that little pad Michelangelo puts on top to show the end of the tendons to give it a little bit more power there. And of course, he's leaning on that little rocky thing to make that little indention on the fat pad. And coming down. So the toes are tedious. There's no shortcut through the toes. Think of them as cylinders or blocks. Then try to see the anatomy underneath them, the proximal, medial, and distal bones of all the toes, except for the big toe. We'll just have a proximal and distal. And you can see I'm feeling about the end of the distal bone in through there. And then blocking that off, toning that in and through and over. And I'll let it be pushed back in a little shadow, getting a little bit, it's blocky, then it's rounder where that joint is. And I'll push that back and tone a little bit. And coming over. Right in through there, and that crease was a little too strong there, so I'm going to take that out to show you a better crease between the end of the top of that joint here and then underneath a little space, and then we'll have the kind of the tendon end in between the last joint of the medial and the proximal area right in through here. That starts to work a little better. And coming on down, rounding that out a little bit, give us that little bit rounder expression, blocks and cylinders together. And it's almost time to put the nail on, clean that up a little bit. Keeping the downward trend of the gesture. Yeah, our toes are like grabbers, and that toe, if it's flexed even further, they will grab on to the end of that stone and kind of flex and buckle a little bit. The medial and distal joint, those two bones will flex. They will kind of bend in and kind of create an under looping with the fat pad and grab like we would with our fingers a little bit. Not to the same extent, but in the same way you can grip the ground with your toes. You can actually drag something like a towel. You can drag them with your toes and bring it forward. So putting on the nail now, embedding it into the skin, which kind of overlaps and flows, especially in the side ends where it gets fatter there with the cuticle, and have it coming in, trying to keep it pointed downward. There we go. Get that to work for us. So let's see if I can get that curve going better. There we go, just a little bit better. What's really going on there, I think it was hard for me to see when I was drawing from my computer. It can be a little tough, and having to see it from, I have to see it from a little bit of distance, so it's not in the camera, the images I draw from. There's a space between the end of the nail and the shadow of the big toe that I would have wanted to, if I had to go back and change it. It's not significant, but there's a little space between there that would have helped show that distal kind of padding better a little bit. So finishing out the second toe area, toe system, if you will, and feeling that tendon out a little bit further. So it comes down, and feeling this one. If it were there, it would feel something like and look something like this, coming off the metatarsal down and not get so buried. The tendons tend to get buried up at the top around the arch, the transverse arch area up through there, depending on the model. Flatten crease. That flattens out more severely, but still not completely cut off. You're putting on getting onto the third toe now. Here we go. So what I do here, I look for this curve, tells me where the joints could be as I align them, and they're on the curve, so they're not all parallel. And then I'm looking for where the toes attach into the medial part of the end of the metatarsal phalangeal joint there. As I get back, if I get back to it here, and then I'll look for the distance between, or the top part of the box. Each one of these toes, from this 3/4 point of view from above, has a top and a left side that we're seeing, and I want to see where the top right edge and the center side of the left of the toe is, so that I can get a greater distance of the width of the toe. That's probably one thing that's difficult. And one thing that I haven't really talked about is, well, I've talked about a little bit, is there's space in between the toes. We have open space. So if you don't believe me, take a look at your own feet. Unless you're a duck or an Aquaman or woman, you're going to have some space in between those toes. Make sure, number one, you clean those spaces. Okay, good hygiene, but also, point being is that there is space in between, and you a lot of times you don't see the room between, so students will jam the toes together. There needs to be the feeling of space in between those toes. So putting on the third toe, feeling the top of the box, and then the outer edge as it gestures. It's the same gesture as it coming down and over. It ends at a little bit more of a point. So lean in a little bit more to the second toe, and again, it's going to get a little easier to draw. Get the tendinal ending head with the condyle. Coming around. It's a little bit more of a point, doesn't it? So it's getting a little bit more pointed here. And feeling that through where it ends. I just judge it against the other toes and weigh that balance. So it's kind of a downward trending movement of joints. Top of the condyle, of the proximal condyle. That thinning curve in, and then it would go outward, and then it will connect up to the metatarsal. Little cast shadow through there, and just suggesting the space in between without. We'd have to bring the toe in, or the foot in, and spread the toes to see them, but there'd be space in between. And that's generally where the fat pad ends and the space starts at about the end, relatively the end of the metatarsals, into slightly the proximal phalanges a little bit through there. Finishing out, fiddling with that toe, big toe a little bit, so clean it out a little bit. It's kind of sets the standard for everything, roughly everything else. Finishing out that condyle, proximal condyle, on the medial part of it through here, center part where tendon would be. Finishing that out a little tighter. Then around it down, that head top of the toe. Then coming on down with the outer edge of the contour and into what will be the tip of the nail, showing through. Embedded. See how curved that cuticle under curved it is. So it curves the opposite way. Most people draw it the wrong way. You have to draw it the opposite way. So it's embedded in, so the skin is raised a little and it's folded up and over. That's why you get those little dark shadows under the cuticle a little bit, because they're folded up under there, and the light source is at a high enough angle and slightly to the left so we can see a shadow underneath there. Then the nail coming down and curving a little bit, and then we get we'll get shadow turn there as it turns into the edge of a box. And thinning out that nail a bit. It's a little bit more pointed, which will turn that toe back a little bit more in the center and through there. There we go. So feeling out the side of the toe, we've got 2 more to do, the fourth and fifth of the pinky toe. Just getting some contour, turning around, almost there with this study. And so now I feel that space where they're coming down, middle space in between, contouring over, contouring down, tendon coming in. There we go. Getting a little bit more of the head in through there. Now ready to put on the fourth toe. Thinking of a box. Ending it where the metatarsal ends, where that crease is, and then thinking where its width ends, and the pinky will, there's some space in between that with a little dark dot in there. And then curving around the pad on the outside. The pad and also the adductor digiti minimi. And then we have the pinky toe, which bulges a little bit. I probably overextended in this viewpoint, but it's okay. Take artistic license. It's a real strong joint. See how I curve it and then I turn it? It's a real super strong joint. Super curved joint. Not necessarily strong, but super curved. Ball. In this case, a cylinder turning. And then we get a little bit of that pinky distal look to it. It's more like just drawing the bone. Just kind of a thicker, fleshier part of it. It's part of what drawing the feet are, is just drawing those bones of what we need to know. Okay, taking a look at proportion decently well. We're going to lay on that next toe, flat, more flat, coming out, opening up, coming outwards, the flat of the top of a rectangular box. And then we get that arching curve. This is the reason why the bottom of our feet we don't see all the toe prints, because these are arched and curved and come up and over, and then we see the fat pads of the bottom of the toes. Pushing the darks in between the toes a little bit to help. I'm almost there with the last toes, not too much more to go. Feeling that tension against that, turning it. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll draw one area and then I can see little problems with others, and okay, now I see it, because as I see another area I can relate back to it, and I'll just kind of change that really quickly, like I did with the big toe fat pad. Bringing down the fourth toe, knuckling in here with the medial distal connection through here, it really turns over, and you're going to get a little bit extra where the tip of the nail would be, right? That little dark light patch in through there. It's basically just bone structure. Then I get a little overturn here, overlap right in through there of the end of that phalangeal joint here and here. You pretty much got them now working for us. Probably the pinky is a little bulged out upward, but I think it's okay. It works pretty well. And I'll tone this down a little bit so it comes on in. So that really curves. I really made an issue of that curving, so it's fine. And letting this fade back a little bit in the distance. Cleaning up the cuticle area, make that kind of fall in there, that nice divot. Pulling the pinpoint out and holding that nice and super tight. And then throwing over the curve. The nail curves over. Keeps on curving. There's a big vein on the first metatarsal about halfway up. You can it's not a tendon, it's a vein coming over. And then you can draw it or not draw it. I just left it out. And I'm just cleaning up the drawing a little bit here. Make sure that joint, that phalangeal joint is overlapping the right in this area, this arch between the fat pads that sit underneath. They come out of the toe and through there. It overlaps, that gradual turn. And I'm going to just bring out some of the anatomy in through here. Extensor digitorum longus area and tibialis anterior area a little bit further. Not by a whole lot, just that little divot and more right through, not there, but right, well, I've already had it right up into, above right into there. It's where the tibialis anterior separates from the extensor digitorum longus. Bringing out that condyle connection. A little stronger where it sits in. You can see the shadowing there on the sculpture. Turning. There we go. Malleolus. Now we're getting into that tendon area, downward trending. Feeling that gradual plane change, higher towards the medial side, lower towards the lateral side, but also creasing, and then it more flattens out right in through this area where the metatarsals end and the proximal phalanges begin in through there. And that's about it. All right, now on to the next one. So we're looking at now a foot from the famous sculpture called generally the Laocoon Groove, ancient Greek sculpture, and it's just a gorgeous sculpture. Take a look at the whole sculpture sometime if you're not familiar with it. Most of you out there in our students should be familiar with it with your art history classes. So it's a wonderful place to look at several different feet, and we'll take a look at one of them here in really placing a lot of stress on the ball of the foot with the toes really arched up as classic kind of grabbers. So first thing now, we're going to start to do the gestural lay-in here and to get the proper angling of the foot coming down now to the side here. Excuse me. And looking at the downward flow of the gesture of the foot, angle the foot here, and then coming into now the ball of the foot from the middle cuneiform area. And then on down to the ending point where underneath slightly the big toe there with that into the metatarsal knuckle in through there. And then we curve over to the toes, the middle toes in the small pinky toe there. Notice how raised up that is. So the bulk of balancing this foot is done by the three middle toes and a little bit of the big toe, and a lot less in this case with the particular pinky toe as well. You'll notice in this view especially that the bulk of the muscles now in the cuneiform area, the extensor digitorum brevis, the longus, and the extensor hallucis are doing quite a bit of the work in this patu, that bulking egg, very, very strong egg form, and then behind it we get a little bit of the pad, and we get slightly the fifth tuberosity of the fifth metatarsal too as well. So now we're just laying in. I'm laying in the overall gesture, working with the tightening of the malleolus or the ankle. A little higher now on the medial end and a little bit lower ultimately with the lateral end. This viewpoint, they're fairly equal, but when that foot hits the ground level, those ankles of the tibia and then the fibula are really gonna change quite significantly for sure there. So showing it curving in and through here. And now getting a feeling of that coming down, that real strong stress, sheer stress of all that weight on those 3 toes. It's a very strong and powerful sculpture. And this is a particularly stressful area of it. Of course, we're looking at the foot, so it's perfect for us in our particular viewpoint to work with. Now, getting the condyle of the tibia coming on in here to the side of that. So it wraps around that joint, kind of like a hinge joint, the spool, and feeling that around. You can see where the end right there of the the extensor in through there ends, and you get the wrapping around of a tendon on the other side. It's a very curved surface, and it gives you a very nice rhythmic kind of quality, wrapping around over the top of the tibia a little bit, the head of that, in through and over, and then you're going to get that bony protrusion coming out of the ankle. And remember, this sculpture is it's got to be at least 3,000 or 4,000 years old. I think I'm in the ballpark there. So the Greeks knew a lot about anatomy. They opened up the body and looked at the body and named it and studied it. And their sculpture showed that after many millennia or flatter sculpture, they get into more rounded sculpture. So feeling that roundness now over with the Conte stick. And then coming in now, you see this narrows a little bit, and then we get a little wider, narrowing there, and then we're going to get wider later. Now that tendon will come all the way down. We'll find that rhythm, pulling over, curving, and then coming back over. Then we'll find the transverse arch and feel the real broadness of that cuneiform area, and then the extensor muscles, the Brevis muscles now on the side. Really a strong head of one coming over and moving to the third toe, tendon of the third toe. So it's really heading out there strongly, and it's going to move over. It's really bulky on a slanted axis of its true thickness. Get a little bit of divot crease, and then it creases the strength, working across. There's the width of the axis there. There's its bulkiness underneath. Now that's starting to pull back, and we get that abductor hallucis muscle underneath. And I was probably shot that a little bit too long, so I'm gonna a little not quite angled enough, so I just kind of blurred that out just so it would cover up. And that becomes like erasing, especially when you're drawing and then we're turning over. And this is going to sit in behind that angle of the metatarsal coming down with the fat pad. So we've got a nice angle showing that diagonal movement. And we'll come underneath here. Feel that toe coming through. Find the top of that. So curving down, curving through, over, finding the other tendon coming down along that metatarsal. And you can see the nice change of the big toe metatarsal as it curves in, where that flat ball, where the ball gets flatter and it hits where that crease is. You can see those tendons crawl up and then down to the phalanges So about the 5th, right where I put the arrow there, that's about where the 5th metatarsal will be right there. I crease in through here, straight line across, and you can see they line up. The pinky lines up with that top end through there, just in this particular angle. I don't know if it always does. I don't think so. So just getting the feel of the ball of the proximal phalange, and then the gesture now of the other toes. So I like to gesture them out. And then there's that strong creasing area. There we go, right in through there. Nice strong crease, curved as well. See, under arch. Kind of feeling that diagonal part of the ball coming down, tendon, feeling a tendon coming down. Gesture the toes. Very blocky look in through here, and it's got a slight side plane that we can modify as we get a little closer to the finish. Clear that up, make it a little smoother. Finding that top now, and coming over. Gently shading the side. And so what I'm looking for is I'm finding the end of the metatarsal here, and then finding the metatarsal phalangeal joint where those two come together, the proximal phalange of the big toe. It's a huge one. That connection is huge for the toes. And then bringing the side of that down, and that will overlap everything else and give us the side of what we now see as the true part of what we think is the big toe in through there, and then ends the fat pad underneath, and we have fat pads on the back of our toes underneath, curved over pretty well. So have a nice arch coming over the toe there. And then moving around, finding the outer edge, and finding what I'm finding here is the top tip of the distal bone right in through there with fat pad in there, that triangular bone, and it curves down. It's kind of an upward trend. Now, I'll show you in a few other parts here of the toe. We just think of the general toe direction. All the small toes will arch and point downward and grip. The big toe will point upward. That is a tried and true state approach to the toes. The toes point upward, the big toe points upward, and the rest of the toes point downward to grip the floor. Because you can lose your big toe. I hope you don't. I don't want to lose my big toe, but you can lose a big toe, but losing small toes will be devastating to balance and walking. So that toe is touching that platform pretty strongly, so it flattens out into there. It gets a little bit of a bulge in through here. So we're figuring that out. Coming in to put on now the top part. It overlaps of that distal bone here. So it straightens and it gently curves around, feeling that over. It's like a tube in a box. Sometimes it's straight, sometimes it's tube-like. You can think of them both at the same time as you're working the volume of that toe. Tendon would follow through there. That's not really showing. This curves over. I don't think you can ever draw enough feet, enough toes, hands, and fingers. So we're gonna do 2 videos worth. So through there, get a lot of practice. So it's looking pretty well. The toe is pretty much just in kind of the nail is in pretty much kind of a shadow. Just raised there. So cleaning up that a bit. It gives a little creasing right in through that little area. You see that with a little lighter area? It's kind of reddish pink on the statue. And there's a little light area. That's where that stress of that metatarsal to the cuneiform region is. It'll hit right in there about the navicular area. And we'll get that side. Clean that out a little bit and round that out a little further. There's a lot going on in that toe. Quite a bit of curving and rounding. It's got a lot of stressed areas in overlap and foreshortening. Most of the time you'll see the toes in foreshortening to a degree. And that's why foreshortening, drawing cylinders, drawing rectangular cubes, and getting a good handle on them is so important to drawing, so that you can handle these situations with clarity and purpose. Yeah, just cleaning this up a little bit, emphasizing that overlap a little further with a little darker charcoal, flattening that to show that flatten that bulge right in through here. Let that curve over. There we go. So we've got that working for us, turning that. So those are bones coming together, arched over the top of the distal part of the toe, big toe coming down in. Going up and hitting the ankle now, getting that. Now that I get confident in one area, I can finish in another area. Tendon coming over. And all the way through. Look at that beautiful tendon show coming on through. That's a deeper tendon muscle, because it would not be the longus, the Fibularis Longus, or the Fibularis Brevis. Those would go back in the back part of the fibula. So we know that. It's probably a deeper muscle that I don't know the name of. But again, you know it's a tendon, and so you just draw it as you see it. It's a cylinder, it's a tube. Even if you don't know the name of it, which I don't. It's one of those deeper muscles that I don't. Again, I'm a straight arrow. I only need to know what I want to know for perfect artistic anatomy, and sometimes the deeper muscles I'm not. If they don't show up, I don't need to learn their names. I won't, but I know that's a tendon. And that pulls over, and it's kind of like a diagonal pull. We're in the extensor digitorum brevis area. Those three muscles with the extensor hallucis that give bulk to that top of the cuneiform area, bones, the tarsals, if you will, and then it's sloped down. Really bulky here is the foot. We see the top of the foot, and then it gets foreshortened because of the planting of the foot, and that gives you that hollow there. So all this is done now in preparation for the next toes to come through. Second, third, fourth, and then the pinky. We're in this beautiful cascading, arched and curved, very arched and curved over, and grabbing the ground. I mean, these sculptures came before Michelangelo sculptures, and so there's a lot that could have been learned from these. The control of anatomy, bone structure, muscle form is just wonderful. So we have now the perspectival box of the bone and the toe, which are pretty much the same. You put the flesh on, little tendon, little fat pen underneath, and you've got your toe. And so we've got that top of the box now working for us. And then we're going to get a little bit of the joint now of the phalange, the medial here. And look how split that condyle is, really split in the middle there. Now we get a little bit of foot separation of toe right in between those two. There's a little bit of space there. That is the space between the toes. You want to leave some space between generally, and be thinking about that too as well. Now we come down the arch, and that's where the second toe is like an index finger, and see how it's straight, and then it has like an L shape, like a boot or a shoe that's gripping the floor so that the knuckle flexes. The two joints there where the nail ends in the cuticle, that's where the start of the distal bone is, and it's being flexed there and being allowed to by the tendons and the ligaments to grip through the fat pads. Those two toes, the second and third, are really gripping down and holding on to the floor in that pose. So they really become grippers. Extraordinarily so. And so that's where it's starting to curve there, right behind the nail where the cuticle is. I'll draw that in a moment as it curves and arches over. I'm drawing the front part of the toe around, right in through there. This curve, come on, do it. Right there's where that distal phalange condyle starts. It comes in a different direction. So the top of the medial comes downward, top to bottom, vertical, and then the distal pushes out and retreads and wants to grab the floor. Clean this up a little bit. So when I'm drawing, I'm adding on layers, and I'm always looking and stepping back really quickly and looking at my eye. You can't tell because you don't have my radar vision that's connected your brain and mine, but as I'm narrating, it helps. But what I'm doing, I'll draw the toe, but my mind and my eye is also looking up at the ankle, the middle of the foot, the cuneiform area, and the beginning of the metatarsal, and say, is there anything wrong, or is there anything that I can go back and really refine as I'm putting on the toe? So I'll go back, and that's why I'll go back and add a little bit or change a little bit. That can make it better as I go along. So it's peripheral vision, and it's also specific vision when I draw a part. If you're having trouble putting the figure together, you're probably not doing that process. You're only seeing the deeper specific part of an area rather than continuing to change your vision or use your brain to allow it to see everything at times and see specifics at times. So you're pulling in and pulling out almost without conscious thought. I certainly am not when I'm drawing, because these were done without narration, which makes them go a little faster, believe it or not, and just letting the subconscious knowledge and experience take over a little bit. It takes a little longer when drawing from in educating and then trying to talk as well. So drawing the tube now of the fourth toe coming back, and you can see where it ends back there, that covers and ends, and it brings down this little tendon area in through here and coming on down. That's a tendon over the metatarsal right there. So there's a little bit of both of those. They make a little nice hollow there. Flatten out on that pinky. Really knuckles up and bulges. That phalange really almost is coming right at us. And then it buckles and curves, and that's why you get this elegant toe structure or toe pose. This is like beautiful model toe pose. This foot is so elegantly rendered in its sculptural form. It's just absolutely stunning. And you get a nice tendon breaking through there and almost separates from the other. That one bulge behind where my pencil is now, that bulge behind there on the most lateral side, is most likely the fifth tuberosity, the fifth metatarsal. And we get some ligament looking in through here, coming down from the extensor digitorum longus and also the brevis, and coming down to the toe. So I'm putting on this top part as I'm starting to get comfortable with the toe gesture, curving along. condyle over the top of the third, working the tube, working where it connects in to the metatarsal, where we call that the crease, the shoe crease. It's like a little trough in this view, especially because it's like a little bowl. You could pour a little water metaphorically and it would stand in there. It's like a little crater created by this position, this pushing down on the ground and gripping it by the second, third, and somewhat of the fourth toe. The pinky is raised up very elegantly. Nail the third, a little flatter. And flex to grip and grip pose. Actually, that's before the nail, sorry. It's easy to get lost. Make sure you count your toes when you draw them. We don't want 6 or 4. And coming around the medial part of that toe. They're relatively similar pose. These two toes and putting the nail on, relatively flatter. It's like a little platform, like a little stair. It has a tread and a riser. The tread are flatter, and the riser comes up. It is in a way a lot like stairs. So putting on that gripping of the toe in through there. There we go, coming around, getting the curve of the nail. And then downward now of that condyle. And on to the fourth. Figuring out the distal medial connection right there. It's just pretty much a ridge. They pretty much made it a bone. Bone with a little nail. Kind of a nail look to it. It's very bone-like. You can just get away drawing with a little distal kind of bone. Put a little shading on it and you got it. Looks just like a toe. Through there. Working on that trough. That knuckle. And coming down that raised. It almost reminds me like a horse prancing with a raised leg. And then working on that egg form now again. Pretty much got all the toes I need on there. We'll get this a little bit more rendered for a sketch. Just a few more minutes here. So another challenging view, moving this tendon down. You can see it coming from the very top behind the fibula, and then moving more medial, and then moving over, and then coming down to the first, gorgeously so. Could be the Hallucis Brevis. See there. So that curve, that rhythmic curve here and then over down to the big toe is really important, so we emphasize that a little bit. Giving that a little bit more thickness back there, just a touch more, bulge that out, around to right here, the tuberosity of the fifth metatarsal, just to give that a little bit more fullness. And getting that tendon over. Turning that over, it's a soft turn. It's a gradual turn there. Filling in that pocket. Turning that form over, using a little contour line, a little tone, a little gradual for both. And I'll just shade that back through a little bit. Gonna give that some push back in that heel, just a little bit. don't want to go too crazy. Don't think. I don't think I've got everything I need. All right, let's go on. Nope, never mind. Sorry. Got a little more here. Defining, darkening. I jumped ahead of the gun. That's better. Put a little finishing touch to the sketch. I'm using the dark charcoal. Sorry about that. I'm using the dark charcoal just to define some joints and edges, kind of deeper little areas. I mean, I could spend all day doing that, but we've got most of what we need here, but it's important to see. Now I've got it. All right. You guys take care, and we'll just go on now to another one. All right, now, so going to finish up completely with this one here, and we'll move on to another here. So this is going to be a bottom of a foot view here by Bernini. Really gorgeous view of the bottom of the foot. Very supple, soft, and we're eliminating some of the detail of the wrinkles that we'd most likely get, and so we can focus on anatomy and structure. So again, working with the bottom of the foot, we want to get, the first thing is that foot pad, that footprint pad feeling and idea to the feet, and that's what we're going for. I'm going for here is that idea, slinking across now and feeling it over to not where the toes are, but a little bit before that. And then also feeling the thickness, and then feeling where the overlap of the top arch there, the transverse arch where the cuneiform bones would be, and then the overlap of the shin bone of the tibia and the top up there. And just in this view, notice how that curve fills into the bottom of the foot there, and the heel curve goes into kind of the top. It's kind of a nice little happenstance thing that happens with rhythm and line and movement. So working through now, we'll get a full view of the bottom of the foot with the toes onto it. So feeling that diagonal coming down with the heel onto the pads over. It looks like the bottom of a shoe, really, at this point in time, and that's not a bad place to start. Now getting the rhythm of the toe from the pinky, over to the big toe and out there. The bottom of a shoehorn and then up to the top, very pyramidal. In through here, we get a little bit of the fibula. Right in through here, and that arch, that diamond shape it's making in this view, and it curving over. Showing you that curve, and then getting a little bit of the Achilles tendon there up to the soleus gastroc area, and just going to feel that curve around. The highlight, you can see the highlight on the marble on the tibia there, and it's in 1, 2, 3, kind of 3 planes. The amazing amount of sanding on this sculpture is just unbelievably supple. Coming around the fat pad of the heel. Coming through now to the bottom of the foot now, getting into that plantar ligament, long plantar ligament, and also into the flexor digitorum brevis region. It attaches up to the calcaneus and down through to the metatarsals and tendons will go further and deeper into the phalanges. So we've got a cast shadow there that I'm dealing with a little bit, and then the thickness of the fat pad on the side, the tuberosity of the fifth, about right in through there. So we want to make sure you get that thickness of that fat pad, and then we'll soften that up. You can need to soften it up later on. As beyond structure drawing, you want to soften up that fat pad later, because it's not a hard, flat edge, but we can draw it that way structurally. Just getting the gesture now, the pinky toe. It's a really, really beautiful, just stunning rhythm of the feet to settle in on that particular position is quite gorgeous. To also know this was subtractive sculpture was particularly amazing. I'm always amazed by sculptors in general. Then we're getting the medial side in through there, a little bit of the Hallucis there, the Abductor Hallucis curving around the bottom of the foot, of the pad now, the heel and Achilles area. Feeling that fat pad, turning around, curving around, curving through. So this exercise is a continuation in building off of the wedge exercise we did earlier, to build upon that knowledge to get to this knowledge, to now draw from the wedge, a very simple kind of abbreviated wedge, because we know we're not going to end up at the wedge, to something more representational in sketch finished. Showing you the curve coming around the front of the tibia. Defining the fibula further. Just the whole idea of coming around the barrel of that area, that foot really curving down. Double checking everything here. And making a more definitive break now within the pad of the foot. And coming on down now, trying to find where that pinky toe will be located. It's important to feel that fat pad against it as it's pushed back and curled, fat pad against it, and then fill out the more lateral pinky area and then over to the middle parts of it, and as it bulges out, and then marking and locating where I think it ends, coming down to underneath the first metatarsal ending. It really takes on a dramatic overturn in fulfillment. So all this gets shaved, curved and shaved, and just the general trend of that is curving around and underneath to the sides, and then there's an underturning that will go the longitudinal way, and then transverse way here, or longitudinal, either way is fine. Then they split. You can see the division where Bernini's given us that little split there. The fat pad over on top of the flexor digitorum brevis. Connections of the tendons. And separating 3 distinct little fat pad areas, pinky, middle, and then the greater toe distinction. Turning through here, turning in towards the middle as it troughs in. That's a slow, gradual slope down to the medial side when it comes back up, as we've seen, and is a gradual ending up and through. So you don't want to make it too harsh of a line. You want to let that, it's basically like the curve of a cylinder. You have to be a little careful with it, even though it's going to have an outline, an ending line, of course, because it's a form that will end, as anything will. So now feeling that direction, really starting to make a dramatic turn, and then it gives a little flick and a curl from the first to the second toe, third, and then fourth into the pinky. It down trends, it's like a waterfall, and then it kind of flicks upward as they all trend downward. And as you can see, the big toe trends upward which will be away from us because of our point of view, our position. Curve in and up. There's a lot of strong curves with the toes that happen very quickly. Curve in and curve out, trying to find them separate. And I'm thinking them, I'm thinking them as the bone, but also as cylindrical blocks here, of course, as well. This is important to see. Dealing with toes is a diligent, painstaking job of just staying disciplined to each particular form. Once you get the general flow of all of it, the gesture, then find each individual toe gesture. And we'll do more toe studies in video number 2. This is number 1. And finding the individual gesture of each toe is important. And staying disciplined to each one is tantamountly important. So we pull out now, so you can see a little bit better what's going on here. So getting the third toe now. Feeling it through to the back of the big toe. You want to keep in mind it's very, very triangular in its orientation. So laying it in here. Yeah, that big toe, I know I've cut it off a little bit here. I'll grab it in a moment and get back to a better view of it. And sorry about cutting off a little bit. And that's really that I'm showing that gradual turn one way, the arch, then the flow up the toes a little bit, and getting the fat pad here on the edge cleared out. But the big toe is very much kind of, I call it like a shark's tooth, the distal bone. It's, if you haven't seen a shark's tooth, look it up. It's very, very, very triangular in its essence, and it's very much a three-dimensional kind of triangular, almost equilateral type of structure. I'm moving on now to the big toe here. So laying in with the fat pad underneath here. Little bit of space between now. They're showing that space between the big toe and the second toe there. And just going to start making slight changes now and alterations to here, the fat pads here. Which oftentimes can be very thick. The more you use them and the more you work on rough, irregular surfaces without your shoes. It can be quite rough. In the more athletic events you do over time can build these fat pads up. They can be built up. Very elastic, collagen-like material that gives and changes and bounces back and gives us some spring to our step, if you will. Alright, so unfortunate that I got that out of the camera. I'm not paying attention to where I was in the camera. It's a little off. I apologize for that. We'll get that back in a moment. Feeling that arch coming up, feeling that around. Now it's time to go in and make some deliberate delineations. And get tighter with the drawing here. So feeling that toe turn in, and that small pinky toe change phalanges there from proximal to medial, and then you add the fat pad underneath bulging out through here. Looking at that now underneath, getting that to overlap the tip of the distal part of the big toe, curving over, curving on through. And it's a real challenge to keep these in perspective. You're using, that's the untold dirty secret of all this, is the use of good, solid, intuitive perspective throughout to keep it all together. Underneath the bottom of that toe as it pushes against that fat pad a little bit and through there. Really, really arching, curving over, curving, feeling that position curving. And now putting on a little bit of the nail. And we get that cuticle and also the bottom of the nail as it ends to the distal end there. It really curves over through there. A little bit of bulging here where you get that undertoe of the foot where it blocks out a little bit. So I'll push that back a little and through that area properly. And so the pinky bulging against the fat pad as it undercuts a little bit, squeezes. And then contouring around it, getting to turn. And then separating them out a little bit. And through here with that plantar area of the flexor brevis muscles and the ligament ends and through there. It comes all the way into the calcaneus area underneath. And the direct opposite top and bottom from the Achilles heel. There we go. Now we get that big toe in there. Better. Move the laptop out of the way so we can see it better. There we go. Sorry about that again. Now we can get all those in there. A little cleaner view. There we go. Fat pad. Taking great pains not to make that too harsh. I'm going to soften that in. Don't want to make that fat pad at any point in time as it turns. There's a thickness to it. There's a front and a side, or the bottom and a side actually, and then you don't want that to be too harsh a line. So I softened that up. And then the next toe, the fourth toe, here pushed up against the pinky and then downward, trending a little longer, and working the root stem of it down to the distal phalange towards the end and curving back in. Now I'll start to point into the second toe quite strongly. Curving around that top, feeling that soft edge. And starting to put on that nail. Curving around, curving strongly around, and curving around again, and a little curve in the embedded part of the nail. You're drawing the skin around it, not just the nail, but the skin as it curves and comes into. It kind of takes over the nail. Or fill that in a little bit through there. And just rendering out now a little bit of the fat pad. So I'll work on the toes further. I'll come over here and say, well, how did I do over here? Let me adjust this now that I've got some more toes to work with. Kind of see them all together. And putting on the third, making our way. So just remember that all three of these toes, all four of them, the small toes, are pointing, coming downward gracefully, very gracefully. They're coming downward to try to grip if and when they touch the ground. The big toe is still on its journey upward. I'm going to point that out, the drawing right after this, so you can see that even clearer. You can remember that little diagram, the phrasing that I'll show you, diagrammatic phrasing, and you'll see it all the time. Even drawing the arrows gives you a nice little look at the foot. So we're curving around this foot. It's like coming almost right at us from the bottom, just slightly tilted to this in the side. So we're getting a very bottom view of this teardrop shape of the toe. It's kind of the boxy bottom of it. It's like we're looking at almost the bottom of a box. I have to shade over it to show you a little bit better. Digging in there, working those edges, make sure we get good separation. Right in through there, that line I made on the big toe, see where it's darker? It's like a little bitty side wedge. It's kind of like the fat pad of the foot at the top of the side. We get a little bit of the side and then the bottom. See I'm making those little lines? So it's ridged over its side and it's coming over. That's why that's darker in through there. So a little thickness on that condyle of that bone. Here's kind of the middle. That's where a tendon would be. Coming through the toe. There's the big toe edge, pointed tip. Then bottom head. We get a pretty full view, decent full-on view of it coming down through there. That fat pad splits a little bit. And then working the proximal condyle against the distal in through that area of the big toe. Getting that second toe, the longest toe now. In this viewpoint. Coming over, we don't see much of the nail, but we get that medial condyle head, and then we push that back. And in the curvature of the distal, once I get to it, get off that second toe, that third toe, and then here we go. Then it really curves over again, does a curve, so we don't see much of the nail in Bernini's sculpture. Again, the 3/4 to 7/8 of a box, basically in 3-point perspective. And getting that side plane in the bottom. And showing now the shading of the bottom of that, just to fill that and show that even better, how that's blocky, thought of as a soft block to get those toes working for us. Challenging area, but fun area. To get those toes moving in these beautiful little graceful, almost like little bells, animated bells ringing out. So now we're working on that connection between the proximal and distal phalanges of the greater toe. Tendon would be there. You know, I've made that fat pad line probably a little too strong between where the overlap of the big toe. I would soften that in let's see if I do that. If not, if I kept going, I would soften it in. I think we're pretty close to getting everything we need out of this study. Yep, on to the next. All right, so this one I want to show you the diagram of the just toe structure. So the toes, generally, the small toe, the pinky, the fourth, third, second, they generally tend to trend downward at a slight arch like this. It's going to be a classic look with this next pose. Until we get to the big toe. And the big toe wants to trend upward in a relaxed pose, even. So a relaxed pose, you'll get that arching, curved kind of thing going. So watch for that. Keep a watch of that, and you'll see it on this pose we're going to put over here. I'm going to put on this piece of paper here. You're going to see that, how that works out. So already you can tell how that works. Generally, that again, the basic idea is the pinky toes move downward and trend downward, and the rest of them do the same. And as they begin to move through the toes, they start to trend a little bit more level, yet still keeping a downward movement, and then get to the big toe, which wants to point, come on up as well. All right, so I'm gesturing in now the last of the study on this page. And we've got now the laying of the toes, the laying of the position, a little fat pad changing in through here, manipulation coming across and over, just doing mostly just the toes and a little bit of the top of the foot, not a ton. As we go through, so keep in mind the amount of discipline it takes to work these areas. You've got many bones and muscles to memorize, not only vocabulary, which is important, but I still hold it secondarily to what's most important, which is their form, shape, understanding, and how well can you draw them from observation and also from imagination as well. And a good place to look for an artist who could do that, many of them could and can, Michelangelo's Last Judgment. If you take a look at the Sistine Chapel, both in book form or if you've been to it live, which I still haven't yet, it's one of my bucket list. I need to get there at some point. You will see figures that are very competent, but they look a little stylized in a way that will tell you that Michelangelo probably didn't draw them from observation. He imagined them and drew them from his imagination exclusively. Number one, the poses were extremely difficult, so it was tough to get a difficult pose for a model to hold that. So long story short, can you draw them? Can you draw poses out of your imagination? And that's what gesture and volume are for. And then if you can get a hold of anatomy and get it under your belt, you give your refinement of your drawing. Now, working the drawing that we see in front of us, I've got the gesture of the toes. Now I'm thinking about the volumetric structure of each individual toe. In our particular viewpoint, we see a little bit of a top of a box for these toes. So we see their tops, and then of course they curve down, and we start to see them fall downward. We still see the top of a box, and we also see a left side turned towards us as well. So you can imagine them as boxes, and then cylinders, and then we can start to see them with bone and condyle from each phalange, and then also the tendon on top. And then we can get the fat pads and the nail, and we've got something that's working for us. So ultimately, that's what I'm doing here. Working that big toe, working it outward, finding its gestural conclusion, and then the beginning of its boundary, its volumetric boundary. Poked in the air a little bit. Extended and high. And it's okay if your first pass is a little bit low or raw. Mine's a little bit low, and I'll go back and fill that in. What I want to show you here is getting them all together, roughed in, and then going back into refine them into a finished product. Bringing down the vertical of the toe or the riser, and then back to the tread, if you will, of the flat bulb of the distal phalange. Feeling that side plane of that toe, the toe tip. And the gesture of the nail embedded into the skin, kind of enveloped with the skin. The skin envelops the nail, especially in the cuticle and in the sides, and then as it extends, the part we clip lifts up a little bit so we can grow the nail, and then they can be trimmed at our liking. So, gesture and volume. Blocks, cylinders, egg forms. Thinking about bone, thinking about condyles, perhaps a tendon, and keeping all these attributes subordinated to the overall gesture and structure. So gesturing in the third toe, working my way around. Finding the condyle endpoints to the medial. Remember, the big toe only has a proximal and a distal. It's missing a medial. Otherwise, their toe would be really long, and it probably was at some point. I haven't researched the exact time when humans evolved, and the big toe became less of a thumb and just more of a rigid big toe. Wasn't quite as useful. So I was just filling the points in, curving around, making sure I keep that curve. Very important. Curving over the cuneiform bones, the extensor digitorum brevis, and the Hallucis brevis. Going for the fourth now. Starting to pull back in that rocking chair, arched curve, and we see a little. You can tell we see a little bottom of the foot with the foot pad, which is fun to see, to show that the toes are located in those foot pads about at the middle, so we can see top. We can see middle, and we can also see bottom, all in the same view, which is pretty extraordinary. Anatomical point of view beauty. Topping out at the medial condyle, and down to the distal. Not much in the way of tendon with this particular foot. I think I add some in for effect, just to know that they run over the top of each toe, coming from the extensor digitorum longus and brevis and hallucis to the top of these toes. Putting on the fourth, and then we'll get to the pinky as a gesture. And then we'll be ready to start to really refine and tighten up these areas more cleanly. But in keeping with the toe direction tradition, we've got downward trending second, third, fourth, and pinky, and we've got an upward trending big toe in keeping with our toe structure, skeletal structure and muscle structure and toe structure. So feeling around it all the way through how those knuckles align and don't. That helps with proportion. So we have the bottom of the foot there, fat pad. In through here, it's pointing over at the other direction, coming around and over. Real strong on the lateral and the pinky end, and then on just strong the bottom of that toe. And then we'll place the big toe on top of it. Now you locate the distal tip of the pinky toe, curving in and over. To the top here, to the medial phalange and over to the condyle, very much a tube. And through here, then curving around, curving on over. You'll make a connection to the back to get to the metatarsal, to the fifth. And feeling the underneath the bottom pad of the foot, and a little curve upward there gives us a little bit of the padding as it starts to come up to the pinky, to the metatarsal and end, and then curve back away from the pinky. So run it through that, what I just draw prior to. It's important. So it gives us a gesture there, pretty raw gesture. And we can tighten this up considerably. Feeling the nail through now. So now I've got everything we need for the lay-in part. So let's take this and get this cleared up and cleaned up conceptually and technically. Let's get our concept of space really working well for us. As we start now, it's kind of like starting over again. So I'll take a different color pencil and start to now come in and start to see where I missed, and we see where I can be more dynamic and really tighten this up. It's after working with my gesture. So I'll include a little tendon there on top. We don't see that really in the sculpture, but that's okay. What we can do is imagine that as an anatomical study. So we see that. So just flattening out that space in between the toes, running through there where I put that little darker mark between the two, top of the foot there. Cuneiform bones and metatarsal connection, turning the ridge now on top of the toe, getting to the knuckle, the condyle, the proximal to the distal connection and through there. And that's going to turn pretty good. We see it less on the sculpture just because of the lighting, and then we get the nail embedded into the skin and up. And we'll come around through here, and then you'll get a little flattening, and then curving up and over. Really curls up and through. Here it just curls around. You get that distal triangle bone. And coming in over now, sharpening up the pencil a bit and getting the top of the toe. It could be tricky as it curls. We want to continue to curl all that. That's what makes that toe, those toes tricky. All those phalanges on a curl, they're kind of blocky, but they're also, in truth, very much cylinders too as well. So, getting the tip of the distal area of the toe in through here, getting that bottom, it blocks out a little bit and through. Really clean this up further. I'll get it cleaned up as we go along. Go from a rough gesture, get the bottom of the toe now to show off a little bit more of the blocky part of it and a little bit of light through here. Carving that nail into the skin a little with a tighter edge and line, and then a little tone on the toe. You can see where the way the shading goes is where the distal phalange ends and the padding is underneath it. So I really want to turn this around. Turn that around. That space in between the toes in there. It's enough to get your pinky finger through there, distance-wise, for the most part. They seem pretty closed up when we see the feet, but there's space in between each toe to air out. Getting that tip. Through here, and now we're going to work on the second toe, looks like. Coming up to the tip, bringing it up a little bit higher and more angled, and getting to the condyle of the proximal to medial. And it's just checking the spatial distance, feeling a tendon coming through. I'll draw it just because I can, and feeling how circular that condyle is around, getting a tip of it. Feeling it around, very circular, as they connect one to the other, proximal to medial, very long, curving over, sheathing over. And that marble there, it belies a little bit of what would really be there. Would be more distance and space between the toes. So I'm gonna draw it as if it's not marble. So how white those lines are, that wouldn't be there generally. It's because of the material and the pose. So I think the pad is going to be, the end of the pad's there, but you're going to see me alter it as I go deeper into the video. And I just broke a pencil, so we'll cut here. All right, sharpened up and back. So now again that fat pad space in between the toes. So I got the between right, but that fat pad's going to have to be brought down. For this, I take a look at it. I didn't want to get it too low, but see, I tone that in. It'll be in shadow, and it's going to be a little bit thicker later on as it comes through. Especially when I get the fat pad under the pinky really tightened up, I'll see that needs to be a little bit thicker. It's going to raise up, but it's not going to be that low or undercut into the other toe. So now coming back now down the side of the second toe and through here, getting at bulk of the fat pad underneath the distal phalange as it comes around into the nail. So that's the nail edge. But it's got a little extra cuticle on the very outside that turns in, so you have to be careful. So that angle turns in, and there you go, running through. There's a little extra. Just be very, very slow and cautious when drawing the toes to continue to see what's the true nature of them. You'll find that they're very, very puffy in that the nail embeds into the skin, and the skin, for the most part, comes on top of the nail and overlaps it, except for the ending point of where we cut our nails. So overdrew there a little bit, and then we want to turn this in through here, shave that down like a box, and then this nail will come up a little bit and kind of box out and turn into the same kind of almost angle as the ending of it. Through here, this will come down and arched over. So getting that stair-step quality of more horizontal, then a bit of diagonal, then a horizontal with the toe, and so that's a downward trending movement through there, like it's cut off like a box. We could start to put in some background shading just to soften all that up and make it feel integrated. And through there. Curve that toe around, curve them all around. When you get a chance to use, if you use contour line, you don't always have to. You can use value just fine, or tone, value and tone. Feeling the round roughness now starting. You can see where I'm altering. This is good to see where I'm feeling the fat pad out. Is it here? I know it would come in and come out. Maybe it's going to be a little bit wider. Maybe it's going to be down. You see me keep adding to it a little bit to discover where I think it's best. It's getting closer, and we'll keep going with it. Now cross contouring around that toe. Getting that bottom. Again, look at the difference with the two directions of the toes. One trending upward with the big toe, one trending now downward. Very important. Flattening here, now flattening that top a little bit. Where the phalanges end, the metatarsals end, they come together. That third toe, that big nice knuckle there, condyle area, and then flattening that through and then around and arched over. Completely arching that foot, getting more definition out of it. Bringing this toe, now the condyle around, where the medial condyle is, proximal there, and medial here, the curve where they come together. They tap out, and finding its edge along there, and that's a little bit also too deceptive of where that little strong white marble line is between, because that really wouldn't be there. And feeling the top of that bone, the edge of that condyle. And then around the distal condyle, beginning of the distal. And working the buccal now of that cuticle that bulges out. So now you can see that fat pad looks better. And I might even have to bring it down even lower, but it's getting closer to what I want. Still got it's close to really where I want. Cuticle buckles right in through there. And then it comes down the nail, and then the side buckle, see how that side buckles, it's in light, you can see it, how it's lit, it arches over and gives a little cast shadow to the nail, so that you can tell that arches over. It's like a little cylinder on the sides of your fingers by your nail. And we'll get that trending in the right direction, get that nail trending and over. Coming up the underside of the toe. You can add a little bit more of the fat pad. And it's starting to make more sense. So I had it pretty high up, now I can make more sense. I had to guess at it since I can't see it. So I have to use my knowledge of anatomy and then test it. Constantly test what I have and say, is that true? Is that a better glimpse of reality rather than what I had before? And the answer was what I corrected was better. That right in through there is where the side of the toe would be, the phalanges right in through there. You can see them bulk out in there, in the heading, the heads of them. And then the edge of the toe, the end of the toe through there, and then the distal phalange and the cartilage and the fat pad underneath come together to make that a little bit bulkier there. Pull that down. Go back and make a correction. Tighten it up. Hopefully you're not asleep. Pulling over the nail there. And then finding now that it's the tip of the phalange and then falling over. Falling down to the side of the toe there. That side of the toe. Giving it a box-like shape. That's important. And pulling it over. And then finding the tendon. Running across the top of it. Just ever so slightly. And then really not even in the sculpture, I'm just adding it for effect. We can add that on for anatomical knowledge. You can do that if you want to your drawings of feet, even if they aren't there, and that would be correct. You have to know where they're coming from. They're coming from the extensor digitorum longus, and then the extensor digitorum brevis, and the extensor hallucis brevis. And they're going to sheath over the metatarsals and the phalanges. Cylinder, cylinder, cylinder turning. And then side of the toe. And overlapping. Overlapping is important. Each time we have a new joint, we have an overlap. Putting a little dark to really get those to change direction here. Give a nice expression to that. Overlap that. Feel that bottom. Yeah, separating the toe here. And coming over the pinky toe. Getting into the end of the medial phalange, into the distal. Keep on trucking through here. Getting a little tighter with the idea of keeping it a sketch, but trying to get as clear as I can and demonstrate very, very sensitively these changes in through here. So now we're in the fourth toe, working the proximal phalange now, getting it flatter at the top and meeting the metatarsal here. If a change of direction, change of plane, and then we get the medial phalange through here of the fourth toe. We're coming over with a tendon now, getting into the end of it, the distal phalange there, and then that's going to start to turn undercut to get us a little bit more of the cuticle now, just like we did over here. You clear that up a little bit, and it's the top of it. And so if we undercut there, and then we get that cuticle. And then we get the nail embedded into it. It's kind of like a little hood, the cuticle is. It hoods over, it covers it, and it's a little sheathing and housing, if you will, and it jams in there. And it allows it to just kind of pull in the nail into that. It sucks it up. It's kind of like sucking it up a little bit, where it takes it into itself a little bit further. All right, so we're coming now to the last of kind of the toes, and then we'll clean up the drawing a little bit further. We'll clean up our feet, so to speak, or this foot study a little bit. It's still a little sketchy, or a little rougher, and we can clean up. Sketchy's fine. So the bottom now of the fourth toe, getting into that fat pad area and letting it extend outward into now the tip through that area. So you can tell where that phalange makes kind of a hood, doesn't it? And then it comes underneath to the bottom part of the toe, and then we can put on here in a moment the nail a little bit further, so you can get a very thick, look to the toes. It's got this little hooding, and that's the not only the bone, but you get ligament and you get tendon in there, and it tends to make it thick and meaty on all sides of the toe structure too as well. So separating those two areas out here a little further, and then we'll get see to put on the top here, coming around the toe. Feeling that through and over, and then feeling the nail now embedded into the skin and over. A little bit more of an angle through. And getting that to get a little bit more of a hood. There we go. And darken that in just a little bit, put that more in, a little bit more in shadow. A little bit of tip to that condyle, turning that toe over. The toe could really be a little longer if I had to redraw it without having to do a demo. I would say that fourth toe could be a little bit longer. I'd probably make it a touch longer, but I'm okay with it. It's always good to say, critique drawings, etc. It's like, okay, where can I do this a little bit better? Right there, that could be extended a little bit longer. That nail could be a little bit more elongated in its effect. It's minor, but if I had to be really, really faithful to what we were doing, I would say make that a little bit longer. And blocking out this third toe underneath, cleaning it up a little bit. Make it a little bit more elegant too as well. I didn't quite get there with it. All right, so it's starting on the pinky toe, and it's really condyle, distal condyle, and through here. That phalange or condyle is the knuckle part of the phalange right in through there, really strong and bold over curve here. And through and turning up and over. A little bit of what could be a tendon, and then the flattening of the metatarsal and through there. Getting that to really overturn through here, the metatarsal there, the phalange there, proximal medial connection, and then a little tendon coming through. We can show that just as effect. You can see that coming through, and then over now with the toe, with the big toe. Small toe. Get the medial part of that inside. Kind of finding the split of that condyle. Phalange there, and making an issue of that real round kind of quality. It creates, again, that kind of hood so that the nail is gets a little protected in through there. We can see that through here. Here we go. Make that nail a little bit tilted. That's better. Okay, there we go. And underneath, alter that fat pad a little bit. Give it more of a curvy feeling just a little bit in through there. Feeling the tip of it go back at an angle. And feeling that pinky. There's not a lot of material there. It's pretty dense material against the bone, against the fat pad there. curls up, gets a little side bulge here, and then coming down with a little nail coming in. And a lot of nail left there, just a little bit. It'll turn into the nail there. Flicking it over, getting it to sit down, and then getting it to touch down a little bit further. Curling over the condyle. That little connection where the bend is of the fold where the phalange changes direction from distal to medial, and a strong underturning here and some shading in through here to get that to sit back a little bit. And then we get a bulge for the proximal, medial proximal connection, and then we're coming over through to a fat pad underneath, clearing up, flattening out a little bit. Yeah, that fourth toe I'm not completely happy with. I want it to be longer, a little bit more elegant. I don't like that. Oh well. I'd want to go back and change it. But still, I think the overall gesture of the toes work really well, and the structure works pretty well too. I'm just a little unhappy with that fourth toe, but I think you get the idea of everything we're doing. So we're almost there. Now we'll put a little shading to show these off a little bit, soften up their edges so we can see the study further. Just take some of this tone here. Clean this up. I could take this and refine this for another 35-40 minutes. I won't do that to clean that up. I'd go back and change that fourth toe for sure. Now taking a little bit of the dark charcoal and working some deep cast shadows and separative areas where I can make little changes and separations to pluck dark out, bring it down and separate one form for another a little bit. Little cast shadow there. Cast shadow from the pinky onto the fourth toe will help a little bit. Back in through there, the fat pad of the bottom of the foot, in between there. Bringing that in, forcing that in, that bulge into the pinky, that fleshy part there. Cleaning out the toe a little bit. We could do that all day long. I'm just going to do a little bit more, not too much more. There we go. Note to self, redo that fourth toe a little bit. It's a little bit longer, not quite as pulled in. I've got it pulled in a little bit. Could be a little bit more elegant and curved out. Just a little bit longer. Darn it. Oh well. Now let's separate the second toe from the big toe a little bit. See that cast shadow? We can have a harder line there in a darker little area. Zip it with a little bit of dark to pop that out, to clean that up, and to give a little more form shadow to the big toe. Stretch there. Ending now of this distal area of the bone. And bone tip, and then it gets more fat pad underneath, softer underneath the toe. And tightening up and curving that around. And just getting a little bit more form structure to these toes. A little blocky for the first. Now, front of the second here, blockier for the front of the toe. And pull that in a little bit, that under flesh part. A little curvature to that, a little fat pad, idiosyncratic stuff there. Darken it in a little bit. Just a little fine tuning for a sketch. There's subtle values that I'm not getting. I'm choosing to not get on the side of on the tops of the toes, but that's okay for what it is. And then get that middle fat pad to raise it. That looked a lot better. Yeah, much cleaner for a sketch. So all that was about clearing up edges and a little bit of value. So look at the difference between what I had 5 minutes ago and what I had now. So it's a better sketch now.